The first unmistakable sign that the meticulously planned ballet of simulated crisis, the emergency preparedness drill in Maple Creek, had lurched into the discordant territory of genuine sickening alarm, was not a misplaced theatrical groan from a mock victim, nor the unexpected wail of a real siren cutting through the orchestrated soundscape. It was instead a silence so abrupt, so profound, it felt as if the world itself had suddenly been muted, its vital hum extinguished. One moment, the incident command post, a large canvas tent erected with practiced efficiency on the community green, throbbed with the controlled, purposeful energy of the exercise. Handheld radios crackled with simulated damage assessments from volunteer teams spread throughout the development. Calm, measured voices of coordinators like Tom O'Connell, the retired fire chief, relayed instructions for assisting residents feigning injury or distress. The soft, rhythmic ping of a pulse oximeter on a training mannequin provided a steady beat beneath it all. The next, an invisible hand swept across the console, and every light, every sound, every reassuring flicker of connection vanished. The radios emitted only a faint, empty hiss, a sound more unnerving than any alarm. The live drone footage, supposedly monitoring a simulated hazardous material spill near the Willow Creek tributary, blinked off the monitor, dissolving into a stark, accusing blue. Most critically, the dedicated emergency communication network, the lifeline painstakingly established to connect all participants, especially the community's more vulnerable residents with disabilities, directly to the command post, and if needed to external emergency services, simply ceased to function. A chilling, preternatural quiet descended, broken only by the whisper of the late autumn wind as it skittered dry leaves across the asphalt paths, and the suddenly deafening, anxious tattoo of Sarah Miller's own heart against her ribs. This was no drill malfunction. This was catastrophic systemic failure. This was real. Sarah Miller. The state director of emergency communications felt an icy tendril of dread coil in her stomach, a sensation utterly alien to the structured, predictable environment of a planned exercise. She was present at the Maple Creek drill, or so she had intended her presence to be, not in her full official regalia, but as a quiet observer, a volunteer offering a hand where needed. Her goal was to gain first-hand insight into how community-level preparedness initiatives were truly integrating the state's newly recommended protocols, particularly those designed to address the specific challenges faced by citizens with mobility impairments, sensory disabilities, or chronic health conditions requiring constant technological support. Maple Creek, an established suburban development with gracefully aging homes and a noticeable population of senior citizens and individuals with diverse disabilities, had been chosen as a pilot for this enhanced drill precisely because of this demographic. Its success was meant to be a model. Up until this precise, heart-stopping moment, Sarah had been genuinely impressed by the dedication of the local volunteers, the earnest engagement of the participating residents, many of whom navigated their daily lives with the aid of wheelchairs, walkers, portable oxygen concentrators, or sophisticated communication devices. Now, watching the expressions on the faces around her in the command post shift from focused concentration to bewildered inquiry, and then with terrifying speed towards the precipice of outright panic, she knew her carefully maintained observer status was about to be irrevocably shattered. The silence blanketing them wasn't merely an absence of noise. It was the sudden, brutal severance of a vital lifeline, a digital umbilical cord, cut without warning. For some of the residents out there, this silence could be terrifying. The Maple Creek Homeowners Association, personified by its current, and many would say, autocratically inclined President Patricia Evans, had been conspicuously lukewarm, bordering on actively hostile towards the entire emergency drill initiative from its inception. Sarah had become aware of the simmering undercurrents of resistance during the preliminary planning stages reports filtering back to her department through their community liaison officer. Mrs. Evans, a woman whose perfectly sculpted silver hair, impeccably tailored power suits, and an unnervingly constant faint scent of expensive but severe perfume seemed to constitute her primary defense against the untidiness and unpredictability of the world, had reportedly characterized the entire undertaking as a flagrant misuse of HOA funds, a needless disruption to the peace and quiet our residents pay dearly for, and most revealingly, in Sarah's opinion, an unnecessary spectacle that might negatively impact our community's prestige by overtly highlighting so-called vulnerabilities. Her objections had been a cascade of petty roadblocks and bureaucratic nitpicking. She had argued vehemently against the proposed use of the community clubhouse for essential volunteer training sessions, citing non-existent scheduling conflicts. She had raised formal complaints about the design and placement of informational posters, deeming them aesthetically jarring. She had even attempted to severely limit the number of non-resident volunteers, including trained paramedics wishing to donate their off-duty time, by invoking obscure and dubiously interpreted insurance liability clauses from the HOA's labyrinthine covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Each carefully manufactured obstacle had been painstakingly navigated by the drill's core organizing committee, a small but passionately dedicated group of Maple Creek residents. This committee was admirably led by Tom O'Connell, whose years as a fire chief had endowed him with both an unflappable demeanor and a keen understanding of bureaucratic intransigence, and Eleanor Vance, a sharp, articulate woman who, despite relying on a sophisticated speech-generating device due to a progressive neurological condition, was a formidable advocate for disability inclusion and community preparedness. Sarah, from her discreet vantage point, had developed a deep admiration for their unwavering tenacity, their steadfast refusal to be derailed by Mrs. Evans' thinly veiled, persistent hostility. Mr. Henderson, an elderly resident who relied on an oxygen machine and lived alone, had told Tom, "This drill, son, it's the first time I felt like someone's actually thinking about what happens to folks like me if the worst happens. Don't let her stop it." The true inciting incident, the first unambiguous act of deliberate sabotage from Patricia Evans, a clear escalation from mere obstructionism, had occurred 3 days prior to the drill's scheduled date. The organizing committee, with crucial technical assistance from Sarah's department, had arranged for the installation of a temporary high-bandwidth fiber optic internet connection and a robust backup satellite communication link at the community clubhouse. The clubhouse was designated to serve as a secondary evacuation point and an alternative communication hub, particularly vital for testing new telehealth monitoring applications designed for residents who might be isolated or unable to reach physical medical assistance during a genuine disaster. These systems were the backbone of the drill's advanced communication strategy. On the crisp Tuesday morning, when the certified technicians from the telecom company arrived, Patricia Evans had physically barred their access to the utility room. She stood an immovable and imperious figure in the clubhouse doorway, clutching a highlighted copy of the HOA bylaws, like a sacred text, her voice resonating with cold authority as she declared that any unapproved structural modifications or the installation of new utility conduits, temporary or otherwise, were strictly prohibited without a minimum 60-day written notice period and a formal recorded vote of the full HOA board. A board it was widely understood that she controlled with an iron fist, its members either intimidated by her aggressive tactics or quietly complicit. It had taken a frantic, nerve-wracking series of phone calls, a direct appeal by Tom O'Connell to a slightly more reasonable or perhaps just more image-conscious board member, and Eleanor Vance's calmly articulated threat to take the entire matter, along with documented evidence of Evans's obstructionism, directly to the regional press and disability rights commissions before Mrs. Evans had grudgingly, resentfully yielded. She had stepped aside with a theatrical sigh of martyrdom, but not before muttering just loudly enough for the departing technicians and organizers to hear, "It's always the same. These people always demanding special treatment, always wanting more, disrupting the peace for everyone else." The confrontation had cost the drill planners nearly an entire precious day of setup time and had left everyone involved with frayed nerves and a deeply unpleasant premonition. Now standing enveloped by that sudden, profound, and terrifyingly complete silence in the command post, Sarah Miller's analytical mind, honed by years of managing real-world crises, raced through the possibilities, discarding them almost as quickly as they arose. This wasn't a simple equipment malfunction, not a blown fuse or a faulty generator. For every single communication pathway, the shortwave radios, the internet-based video feeds, the backup satellite uplink, even the specially configured emergency cellular network extenders designed to boost signals in Maple Creek's notoriously patchy coverage areas, for all of them to fail simultaneously in the exact same instant, pointed to something far more systemic, something far more sinister. It suggested a coordinated, targeted attack on the core infrastructure. Tom O'Connell was already jabbing at his personal cell phone, his usually ruddy face now a mask of grim concern, trying to raise the County Emergency Operations Center. But the weak, intermittent signal that plagued this semi-rural enclave, one of the primary reasons for implementing the drill's own robust communication network, was failing him. Nothing but static, damn it, he muttered, his frustration palpable. Eleanor Vance, stationed beside a bank of now inert computer monitors, was typing with fierce, concentrated energy on her advanced speech device, her brow deeply furrowed with an anxiety that mirrored Sarah's own. All communication channels are offline, her synthesized voice announced with a stark clarity that, despite stating the obvious, somehow amplified the severity of the situation. Repeat, all primary and secondary communication links are confirmed severed. This includes the direct alert lines to the assisted living units and the wellness check pendants for our most vulnerable participants. The assisted living units were a small purpose-built cluster of ADA-compliant apartments situated on the quiet western edge of the Maple Creek development. These were home to several residents with significant mobility limitations, complex chronic health conditions requiring constant monitoring, or those who, like 80-year-old Mrs. Albright, who suffered from severe emphysema, relied on electrically powered medical equipment. These residents were key participants in the drill, actively testing new panic button systems, remote health monitoring devices, and specialized communication interfaces from within their own homes. The sudden chilling thought of these individuals, potentially believing a genuine emergency was unfolding their lifeline to the outside world, inexplicably dead, unable to call for help or receive vital information, sent a fresh, sharp spear of alarm through Sarah. "All right, listen up," she said, her voice deliberately calm, but infused with an unmistakable undercurrent of authority that instantly drew the attention of the stunned volunteers in the command post. She hadn't intended to overtly invoke her official position unless a situation escalated beyond local control, but this unequivocally qualified. "Tom, keep trying to reach the county EOC on your cell. Move around to find a higher spot if you have to. Eleanor, do you have offline access to the participant roster for those assisted living units, specifically their known medical conditions, emergency contacts, and any special equipment needs?" Eleanor Vance. Her focus unwavering, nodded sharply, her fingers already navigating the interface of her tablet. "Yes, I have a locally stored database, but without the network, I can't push updates or receive their status signals. Work with what you have locally for now," Sarah instructed, already moving with purposeful strides towards the main communications console, now just a collection of lifeless indicator lights and dark screens. "I'm Sarah Miller, State Director of Emergency Communications. I need to see the complete schematics for this drill's communication setup, and more importantly, the infrastructure maps for Maple Creek itself. Now, where are the primary network junctions, the physical cable pathways for this entire development located?" A young volunteer, a tech-savvy college student named Ben Carter, who had been instrumental in setting up the command post's local network, looked up from the uselessly blinking router in his hands, his eyes wide, with a mixture of shock and dawning recognition at her title. Director Miller, wow. Okay, the main fiber optic trunk lines and the primary coaxial cables for the entire Maple Creek development, they all run through a central underground conduit. The primary physical access point, the main distribution hub, is located inside the HOA maintenance shed. It's a small block building out behind the community pool house. Mrs. Evans, she keeps it padlocked. She's very particular about it. Says she has the only key. Patricia Evans. The name yet again hung in the air like a toxic pollutant. Sarah felt a cold, hard knot tighten in her chest. A coincidence? Or was this the culmination of her simmering resentment, an act of calculated, malevolent interference? "Someone get me the heavy-duty bolt cutters from the emergency response kit," Sarah ordered, her mind already several moves ahead, analyzing possibilities, formulating contingency plans. "And someone else find Mrs. Evans. Instruct her, don't ask, instruct her, that I require her presence at that maintenance shed immediately. Tell her it appears to be a critical community infrastructure failure, and tell her the State Director of Emergency Communications is requesting her cooperation." She knew with a grim certainty that if Evans was indeed responsible for this, the mention of her official title might either compel cooperation or send her scurrying further into denial. The rising action, the insidious escalation of Patricia Evans's campaign against the drill, had been more than just bureaucratic foot-dragging. It had, in the week leading up to this disastrous morning, taken on a distinctly more personal and malicious tone. Anonymous, crudely printed flyers had mysteriously appeared on car windshields in residents' driveways and stuffed into mailboxes throughout Maple Creek. These flyers, filled with alarmist rhetoric and outright falsehoods, claimed the emergency drill was a deceptive front for corporate data mining of private medical information, and warned that the exercise would inevitably attract undesirable elements and criminal activity to our otherwise peaceful and secure community. Several older residents had reported unsettling encounters with Mrs. Evans herself during their morning walks. Adopting a facade of deep, neighborly concern, her voice a low conspiratorial murmur, she had questioned the wisdom of unnecessarily agitating our more fragile residents with these frightening, unrealistic disaster scenarios, and had subtly hinted that active participation in the drill might lead to increased HOA scrutiny regarding minor unrelated property compliance issues. A leaking garden hose here, a slightly overgrown shrub there. Volunteers organizing the drill spoke of feeling constantly watched, their diligent efforts subtly but persistently mocked or belittled by Mrs. Evans and her small, loyal coterie of supporters on the HOA board during any public encounters. The atmosphere, which the organizers had hoped would be one of community empowerment, mutual support, and proactive preparedness, had become increasingly tinged with an undercurrent of suspicion, resentment, and a low-grade pervasive anxiety, all seemingly radiating from the meticulously kept office of the HOA president. Now, the sudden total communications blackout was the shocking, undeniable culmination, a direct and profoundly dangerous act of sabotage that far transcended her previous campaign of petty harassment and intimidation. As Ben Carter and another young volunteer, a girl named Maya, who was training to be an EMT, rushed off, Ben to fetch the bolt cutters, Maya to locate Mrs. Evans, Sarah knelt by the silent, inert bank of communications equipment. Her professional training years spent dealing with everything from hurricane aftermaths to wildfire evacuations took over. She performed a rapid, systematic visual inspection of the command post's internal wiring. The routers, the signal boosters, the satellite modem. Everything appeared to be correctly connected, undamaged. This wasn't a localized power failure within the tent, nor a simple equipment burnout. The problem was undeniably external, affecting the source feeds into Maple Creek itself. The sheer instantaneous totality of the outage was what continued to scream deliberate in her mind. It suggested a precise, targeted attack on the physical infrastructure, a single point of failure that had been expertly exploited. A few tense minutes later, Tom O'Connell approached her, his face pale and etched with a new level of fury. "I finally got through to the County Emergency Operations Center on a very faint, fluctuating signal," he reported, his voice tight. "They haven't detected any widespread outages in the region, no storm damage, no utility failures. It's localized, Director. It's just us, just Maple Creek. They're dispatching a patrol car to investigate, standard procedure for an unexplained comms outage at a critical facility. But with these winding country roads, they said it could be 20 minutes, maybe more, before they arrive." He looked directly at Sarah, his decades of experience as a fire chief, of seeing the best and worst of human behavior in crises, reflected in his troubled, angry eyes. "This stinks, Director. This stinks to high heaven. Someone did this. Someone cut us off." "It does, Tom." Sarah agreed, her voice grim, her own suspicions solidifying into a dreadful certainty. "It absolutely does. Let's go pay a visit to that maintenance shed." Patricia Evans was perhaps predictably nowhere to be found when Sarah, Tom, and Ben, now wielding the hefty pair of bright yellow bolt cutters, arrived at the nondescript maintenance shed. Nor was she at the community clubhouse, which was now eerily silent, its designated role as a backup hub rendered moot. Another volunteer, dispatched to her neatly kept colonial-style house on Primrose Lane, reported that while her expensive dark blue luxury sedan was parked in its usual spot in her driveway, gleaming innocuously in the crisp autumn sunlight, there was no answer at the door, despite repeated knocking and ringing of the bell. The maintenance shed itself, a small windowless cinder-block structure, tucked away behind the shimmering blue of the community swimming pool closed for the season, was indeed securely locked, a heavy-duty rust-resistant padlock gleaming on its sturdy steel door. Mrs. Evans's domain. "There's no point in waiting for a key that likely won't materialize," Sarah stated flatly, gesturing with her chin towards the padlock. Ben, looking slightly apprehensive but resolute, stepped forward and positioned the jaws of the bolt cutters around the thick shackle. With a grunt of effort and a sharp metallic snap, the padlock sprang open. Tom pulled the heavy door outwards, its hinges groaning in protest. It opened onto a dim, cool interior, smelling faintly of old chlorine-damp earth and chemical fertilizers. Against the far back wall, mounted on a sheet of plywood, was a large gray metal panel, clearly labeled in stenciled white letters. Maple Creek Communications and Utilities Access. Authorized personnel only. Numerous thick, heavily sheathed black and gray cables snaked into it from a wide underground conduit pipe that emerged from the concrete floor. And there, starkly visible in the focused beam of Tom O'Connell's powerful flashlight, was the undeniable sickening evidence of their deepest fears. Two main multi-strand fiber optic cables, their protective orange and blue outer jackets crudely hacked away, and a heavy-gauge coaxial cable, the primary feed for internet and television services, had been recently brutally severed. The cuts were clean, almost surgically precise, clearly made by a tool designed for such a purpose, something like industrial bypass loppers or specialized heavy-duty cable cutters. Small, brightly colored plastic shards, the remnants of the cable's inner protective jacketing, lay scattered on the dusty concrete floor like pieces of malevolent discarded confetti. The silence from the command post now had a tangible, visible source. Deliberate. Tom breathed, his voice a low, furious growl. This is a calculated criminal act. Someone did this on purpose, Director. They did this during the drill, knowing full well what it would mean. His fists were clenched at his sides. Sarah's blood ran cold, not just from the immediate professional implications of such a brazen attack on critical civilian infrastructure, but from the chilling, inescapable realization of the probable motive behind it. To cut these specific vital lines at this precise critical time was to intentionally, knowingly endanger the very people the emergency drill had been meticulously designed to protect. This was no longer about petty HOA politics or obstructionist power plays. This had crossed the line into malicious endangerment, a reckless disregard for human safety that was almost psychopathic in its callousness. Her mind, with a grim sense of inevitability, immediately irrevocably locked onto Patricia Evans. Her documented history of hostility towards the drill, her increasingly desperate attempts to derail it, her proprietary, almost obsessive control over this single critical access point. It all formed a damning, if still technically circumstantial preliminary picture of calculated sabotage. The midpoint twist, the crucial, unexpected piece of physical evidence that would transform strong suspicion into near-concrete certainty and irrevocably alter the course of the investigation, came not from a sophisticated technical analysis, but from the sharp eyes of young Ben Carter. As Sarah was using her own state-issued satellite phone, a rugged, reliable device she always carried in her emergency kit, but rarely had cause to deploy in such overtly criminal circumstances, to coordinate a priority response from her technical support teams and to formally notify the state police of a major infrastructure sabotage. Ben, who had been quietly, methodically scanning the overgrown perimeter of the shed with his flashlight, let out a small, sharp gasp. Director Miller, Tom, look at this over here by these bushes. Tucked into the damp, mulch-covered soil near the shed's crumbling cinder-block foundation, almost completely hidden by the sprawling, untamed branches of an ancient rhododendron bush, was a small, gleaming metallic object, a pair of professional-grade, high-leverage cable cutters, their hardened steel blades still bearing faint, almost microscopic traces of the distinctively colored orange and blue plastic from the severed fiber optic cables. And lying beside them, partially obscured by a single large, rust-colored fallen maple leaf, was something even more astonishingly, damningly incriminating, a single elegant, handcrafted silver earring. It was shaped like a stylized maple leaf, intricate and distinctive, and Sarah recognized it instantly. It was identical to the ones Patricia Evans was known to favor, wearing them almost daily as a signature part of her meticulously curated, community-proud public image. Ben, his face pale, confirmed her recognition. Those are Mrs. Evans's earrings. He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I saw her wearing them this morning when she was standing by the clubhouse watching us set up. I remember noticing them because the sun caught them. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. The sheer arrogance, or perhaps the panicked carelessness, of leaving such uniquely identifiable personal items along with the very instrument of the sabotage at the scene of the crime was almost unbelievable. She carefully, without touching anything, took a series of high-resolution photographs of the cutters and the earring, with her secure state phone, the GPS data, automatically embedding with the images. This was it. While not yet definitive proof that Patricia Evans herself had wielded the cutters, it placed her with a high degree of probability directly at the scene of the crime, in possession of the means, and with clear motive and opportunity. The circumstantial chain was rapidly becoming a vice. Yafian. Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled urgency. Don't touch anything else. Not a thing. Tom, I need you to help me secure this entire area immediately. Nobody in or out except authorized personnel. I am officially declaring this a federal and state crime scene. The State Police Major Crimes Unit will be taking lead from here with support from my office on the technical aspects. She took a deep, steadying breath. I need to make another call to my direct contact at the State Bureau of Investigation. This situation has just escalated far beyond a local disruption. This is a major felony with severe implications. The climax of this suburban drama, the unraveling of Patricia Evans's carefully constructed world, unfolded not in a raucous, accusatory HOA meeting, as one might expect, but with the quiet, methodical, and inexorable efficiency of a full-scale criminal investigation converging on an unsuspecting tree-lined cul-de-sac. Within the hour, Maple Creek, particularly the normally tranquil area around the community pool house, the maintenance shed, and Patricia Evans's own residence on Primrose Lane, was discreetly but thoroughly permeated by the presence of plainclothes, state investigators, and uniformed forensic technicians. While one team meticulously processed the crime scene at the shed, collecting the cutters, the earring soil samples, and searching for any other trace evidence, another group of investigators armed with a quickly obtained and judicially approved search warrant based on Sarah Miller's sworn testimony, the compelling photographic evidence, and the clear endangerment to vulnerable citizens was dispatched to Mrs. Evans's home. Patricia Evans was discovered in her meticulously ordered antique-filled sunroom, a book lying open, but unread in her lap, a half-finished cup of herbal tea, growing cold on the wicker table beside her. She was ostensibly attempting to project an image of calm indifference, though the agitated tapping of her foot and the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hands as she greeted the investigators betrayed her carefully constructed composure. When confronted by the lead investigator, a calm, experienced detective from the State Bureau of Investigation named Maria Ramirez, and formally served with the search warrant, Mrs. Evans's facade of aristocratic disdain and affronted innocence began to visibly crack. She initially feigned utter bewilderment and then indignant outrage at the mere suggestion that she could be involved in such a despicable act. An attack on our own community's infrastructure, she exclaimed, her voice rising slightly in pitch. How perfectly dreadful! I trust you will employ every resource to find the culprits. I imagine it's probably the work of outside vandals, or perhaps those disgruntled teenagers from the next town over. Our community security has become so regrettably lax, despite my very best efforts to maintain standards. But her carefully rehearsed narrative, designed to deflect suspicion and cast herself as a concerned community leader, began to unravel with alarming speed under Detective Ramirez's polite but incisively professional questioning and the methodical search being conducted throughout her home. The investigators, efficient and dispassionate, quickly located the matching silver maple leaf earring lying conspicuously on her polished mahogany dresser in the master bedroom. In her garage, tucked away inside a canvas gardening trug beneath a pair of muddy trowels, a forensics technician found faint but distinct traces of the same uniquely colored orange and blue plastic shards that had been found at the maintenance shed, strongly suggesting the cable cutters had been recently stored or wiped down there. And then the digital forensics team, who had begun an examination of her home computer and smartphone, both of which were also seized under the terms of the warrant, uncovered a cascade of damning digital evidence. Her internet search history from the previous evening and early that morning included a series of highly incriminating queries: how to disable fiber optic cable connection, Maple Creek HOA utility schematics download, legal penalties for damaging public utilities, and most chillingly, emergency drill protocols, legal liabilities for organizers. More damningly, still anonymized location data retrieved from her smartphone's service provider data, which she clearly hadn't realized was being logged or hadn't thought to disable, placed her phone, and by strong inference her, in the immediate geographical vicinity of the HOA maintenance shed for a period of approximately 15 minutes that very morning, a time frame that coincided precisely with the calculated moment of the widespread communications outage. There were also several recently deleted text messages recovered by the forensic analysts sent from her phone to a known sympathetic but increasingly nervous HOA board member, in which she complained vehemently about the ongoing drill, stating unequivocally, "Something drastic needs to be done to stop this ridiculous farce before it makes us all look like incompetent fools. Sometimes decisive unpopular actions are necessary for the greater good of the community's image." The final irrefutable piece of the puzzle, the evidence that would leave Patricia Evans with no plausible deniability, came from an unexpected but technologically astute neighbor. This neighbor, an amateur drone enthusiast, who Mrs. Evans had ironically and publicly praised some months earlier for using his drone to help locate a lost pet, had been testing a new high-resolution camera on his drone that morning. His flight path had, by sheer coincidence, taken his drone almost directly over the community pool and maintenance shed area during the critical time window. Reviewing his footage later that day after hearing rumors of serious trouble at the drill, he discovered a fleeting but remarkably clear aerial image. It showed a figure unmistakably Patricia Evans from her distinctive silver hair, her build, and the light-colored jacket she had been seen wearing earlier, walking briskly away from the hidden rear of the maintenance shed just minutes before the drill's communications network had catastrophically collapsed. In her hand, partially concealed by her body, she was carrying a dark, oblong object, consistent in size and shape with the recovered cable cutters. Faced with this meticulously assembled mountain of irrefutable physical, digital, and visual evidence, presented to her calmly point by Detective Ramirez in the suddenly oppressive silence of her own impeccably neat living room, Patricia Evans finally completely broke. The haughty indignation, the condescending denials, the carefully constructed persona of the concerned community matriarch, it all dissolved into a torrent of blubbering, self-pitying, and ultimately pathetic confession. Yes, she admitted, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She had cut the cables. She hadn't meant to cause any real harm. She insisted through choked sobs, her voice now thin and whining, failing utterly to elicit a shred of sympathy from the seasoned investigators. She had just wanted the drill to fail spectacularly, to be publicly discredited, to prove to everyone that it was an unnecessary disruptive waste of time and precious HOA resources. She claimed with a bewildering lack of self-awareness that she had simply wanted to demonstrate how utterly incompetent the drill organizers were and how their incessant focus on catering to these special needs people was damaging Maple Creek's carefully cultivated reputation for exclusivity and high property values. She seemed genuinely, pathetically shocked by the gravity of the multiple felony charges now facing her, as Detective Ramirez formally recited them: aggravated sabotage of critical public utility infrastructure, willful destruction of property, reckless endangerment of multiple vulnerable individuals, and obstruction of an official emergency preparedness proceeding. Her meticulously ordered world, built on a foundation of absolute control and superficial appearances, was visibly, irrevocably imploding around her. The falling action following her arrest and formal charging was swift and decisive, sending ripples of shock and then a strange sense of communal catharsis throughout Maple Creek and beyond. Patricia Evans was booked her official mugshot, a stark, unvarnished image of a frightened, disheveled woman, stripped of her usual polished veneer, a shocking contrast to the carefully maintained public image she had cultivated for years. She was eventually released on a significant bail sum, but with stringent conditions imposed by the court, including the surrender of her passport, a court order prohibiting any contact, direct or indirect, with any residents of Maple Creek, particularly the drill organizers and participants, and mandatory psychological evaluation. The Maple Creek HOA board, thoroughly disgraced by its association with Evans and facing an unprecedented wave of incandescent anger and demands for accountability from the thoroughly outraged homeowners, dissolved within days, its remaining members tendering their resignations en masse. an interim community management committee which notably included a reluctant but determined Tom O'Connell, a newly empowered and widely respected Eleanor Vance, and an impressively capable Ben Carter, who had decided to switch his college major to cybersecurity and emergency management, was quickly formed by residents to manage the community's immediate affairs and to cooperate fully and transparently with the ongoing state and local investigations. The immediate aftermath of the sabotage and Evans's arrest saw the Maple Creek community rally in a way that was truly extraordinary to witness. Volunteers, many of whom had been hesitant or intimidated before, now worked tirelessly alongside Sarah Miller's state technical teams and local utility crews to not only repair the severed communication lines, but to install even more robust, technologically advanced, and securely redundant communication systems throughout the development, incorporating lessons learned directly from the sabotage. A week later, the Maple Creek emergency preparedness drill was rerun, this time flawlessly, with an even larger and more enthusiastic participation from residents, many of whom were now profoundly personally aware of the critical importance of such preparations and the potential dangers of complacency. The disabled residents, initially shaken and angered by the targeted nature of the attack on their safety, found themselves enveloped by an unprecedented wave of genuine support, empathy, and practical solidarity from their neighbors. Their courage, their resilience, and their willingness to participate again were openly lauded. Eleanor Vance, using her speech-generating device, gave a powerful, widely circulated interview to the regional news channel, eloquently highlighting not just the criminality of Evans's actions, but the broader societal need for true empathy, proactive, inclusive planning for vulnerable populations, and eternal vigilance against the insidious creep of prejudice and dehumanization that can lurk even in seemingly placid suburban enclaves. Sarah Miller, true to the unspoken commitment that had driven her career, used the deeply disturbing Maple Creek incident as a powerful, undeniable, and tragically illustrative catalyst for systemic statewide change. Working closely with a bipartisan group of state legislators, disability rights advocacy organizations, with Eleanor Vance now playing a key advisory role, and emergency management professionals from across the state, she spearheaded the drafting, relentless lobbying for an eventual passage of the Maple Creek Community Resilience and Communications Mandate, a landmark piece of public safety legislation. This new law profoundly reshaped homeowners association responsibilities and accountability across the entire state concerning disaster preparedness and emergency communications. It mandated that all HOAs, regardless of size or affluence, develop, regularly test, and formally file with county emergency services comprehensive emergency communication plans with specific, detailed, and actionable provisions for ensuring the safety and connectivity of residents with disabilities or other access and functional needs. It established clear lines of legal accountability for HOA boards, required demonstrable cooperation with local and state emergency management agencies during drills and actual emergencies, and implemented significant civil and, in cases of willful negligence or obstruction, criminal penalties for non-compliance. The legislation also cleverly allocated a portion of state emergency management funds for competitive grants to help communities upgrade their communication infrastructure, provide CERT community emergency response team training, and develop more inclusive preparedness programs. The cautionary tale of Patricia Evans and her reckless, selfish act of sabotage became a stark, unforgettable case study cited in emergency management training courses, HOA governance seminars, and even ethics classes across the state and beyond. In the final resolution, the community of Maple Creek began a profound and palpable healing process. The acrid atmosphere of fear, suspicion, and division sown by Patricia Evans's toxic leadership slowly but surely dissipated, replaced by a new, invigorating spirit of open communication, genuine cooperation, and mutual respect among residents. The community actively, consciously embraced its diversity, recognizing that true collective strength and resilience lay not in a facade of artificial homogeneity, but in the vibrant tapestry of its varied members and their inclusive support for one another. The newly elected permanent HOA board, with Eleanor Vance now serving as its widely respected vice president and Ben Carter as its youngest ever tech advisor, implemented a range of forward-thinking, community-focused initiatives. These ranged from tangible improvements like enhanced accessibility features for all common areas and a revamping of the emergency communication systems to regular community building events, potlucks on the green, and intergenerational skill-sharing workshops that fostered genuine connection and camaraderie between neighbors who had previously been little more than passing acquaintances. The unassuming cinderblock maintenance shed, once a symbol of Patricia Evans's petty control and the scene of her malicious crime, was repainted in bright, welcoming colors. It now housed state-of-the-art securely protected communication relays and emergency equipment, its newly installed door bearing a freshly painted sign, Maple Creek Community Resilience Hub, stronger together, always connected. The positive, impactful ending of this suburban drama resonated far beyond the neatly manicured lawns and quiet cul-de-sacs of Maple Creek. The Maple Creek Mandate directly led to tangible life-saving improvements in emergency preparedness and community resilience across the entire state, ensuring that countless vulnerable citizens would be demonstrably safer and better supported in future crises, whether natural or man-made. Sarah Miller, though she consistently shunned personal accolades and redirected praise towards the community members and her team, found a deep, quiet, professional, and personal satisfaction in knowing that a moment of profound crisis, a situation born from one individual's dangerous arrogance and profound lack of empathy, had ultimately, through collective effort and unwavering resolve, resulted in a stronger, more resilient, and demonstrably more compassionate society. The chilling silence that had once briefly terrifyingly enveloped the residents of Maple Creek had been decisively replaced by a chorus of empowered, connected voices and the reassuring steady hum of a community, and indeed, an entire state, far better prepared, far more inclusive, and far more united in its commitment to face whatever challenges the future might hold. It served as a lasting testament to the idea that even the most malicious acts of sabotage could paradoxically sow the seeds of profound, enduring, and positive transformation. A powerful reminder that the true strength of any community lies in its commitment to protect all its members, especially the most vulnerable among them.